Alright, so let me tell you what happened on First Take this morning because, honestly, I wasn't even planning to watch the whole thing. But then I saw the title card pop up about the Lakers and this three-team trade that just went down. And I'm like, okay, I need to hear what they're saying about this. So I settle in with my breakfast, turn up the volume, and right off the bat, Molly Karam starts the show with this serious tone, talking about how the NBA trade deadline is literally days away, and things are starting to heat up. She introduces the segment by saying they're going to break down a trade that just happened involving the Cavaliers, the Kings, and the Bulls, and more importantly, what this means for the Los Angeles Lakers moving forward. Hey, what's up everyone? Real quick before we get into everything, that like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do, but honestly, the biggest way to support this content. Every single like pushes this further, so hit it now. Stephen A. Smith comes on screen, and he's already fired up. I mean, you can tell he's been thinking about this since the news broke because he launches right into it without even taking a breath. He says this trade is absolutely devastating for the Lakers. And I'm sitting there like, wait, the Lakers weren't even involved in this trade. How is it devastating for them? But then he starts explaining, and it all makes sense. He's talking about how the Lakers had their eyes on two specific players, DeAndre Hunter from the Hawks, who ended up going to Sacramento, and Keon Ellis, who was with the Kings and just got shipped to Cleveland. Stephen A. says these were the two most realistic targets the Lakers had been pursuing, the two guys that everyone around the league thought had the best chance of ending up in purple and gold before the deadline, and now both of them are off the board in one fell swoop. Mad Dog Russo jumps in at this point, and he's got this look on his face like he can't believe what he's seeing. He starts going through the details of the trade, breaking down each piece. He says Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis went to Cleveland, Dario Saric went to Chicago to help facilitate the whole thing and clear some salary, and DeAndre Hunter ended up in Sacramento. Mad Dog's point is that Cleveland made out like bandits here because they're getting better players while also shedding some tax money, which is exactly what they needed to do. He says the Cavs are still a second apron team, but they're a lot closer to where they need to be financially. And on top of that, they upgraded their backcourt depth significantly. He's going on about how Dennis Schroeder gives them a veteran point guard who can run an offense and make plays. And Keon Ellis gives them that two-way guard they've been missing, someone who can defend at the point of attack and also knock down shots. Stephen A. comes back and he's shaking his head. And he says, the real story here isn't what Cleveland got, it's what the Lakers lost. He explains that according to his sources, the Lakers were in serious discussions about both of these players, particularly DeAndre Hunter. Stephen A. says the Lakers wanted Hunter badly because he gives them that wing defender they've been desperate for, someone who can guard multiple positions and also space the floor with his shooting. He mentions that Hunter's been kind of the odd man out in Atlanta, playing out of position, not really fitting into their system perfectly, but for the Lakers, he would have been ideal. Stephen A. says the problem was the Lakers didn't want to take on Hunter's long-term salary without getting additional incentives. And they also weren't willing to give up Rui Hachimura in the deal, which is apparently what Atlanta was asking for. Mad Dog interrupts and says, hold on, Stephen A. You're telling me the Lakers had a chance to get DeAndre Hunter, and they said no because they didn't want to give up Rui Hachimura? He's got this incredulous tone in his voice, like he can't believe what he's hearing. Stephen A. fires back and says, it's not that simple. It's about the package as a whole. He explains that the Lakers would have had to give up Rui, take on Hunter's contract, which extends for a few more years, and they weren't getting enough back in return to make it worth it. Stephen A. says, according to Brett Siegel, who's been reporting on this, the Lakers just felt like they would have been getting fleeced in that deal, and they weren't willing to do it. He actually commends Rob Pelinka and the Lakers front office for not making a bad trade, just for the sake of making a move, saying sometimes no trade is better than a bad trade. Then they shift to talking about Keon Ellis. And this is where it gets really interesting. Stephen A. says Ellis was another guy the Lakers were heavily pursuing because he fits exactly what they need, a young, defensive-minded guard who can also shoot the three and doesn't need the ball in his hands all the time. He says Ellis would have been perfect next to LeBron and AD because he could have guarded the opposing team's best perimeter player while also spacing the floor offensively. Mad Dog agrees and says, yeah, Ellis is one of those guys who does all the little things. He's not going to show up on the highlight reel every night, but he's going to help you win games with his defense and his basketball IQ. Stephen A. mentions that Sacramento apparently really valued Ellis, but they were willing to move him to get DeAndre Hunter because they think Hunter gives them better wing depth, which Stephen A. thinks is insane. He says Sacramento is making terrible decisions right now. They should be tearing it down and rebuilding, not adding pieces to try to compete when they're clearly not a playoff team. The conversation continued, and Molly asks them point blank, so what does this mean for the Lakers now? Where do they go from here with the deadline coming up so fast? Stephen A. takes a deep breath and says, this is the critical question. He says the Lakers are now in a tough spot because their two most realistic targets are gone, but they can't just sit on their hands and do nothing. He starts listing off other potential options, mentioning guys like Andrew Wiggins from Golden State, saying Wiggins might actually be a better fit anyway because he's a proven defender who's won a championship and knows what it takes to play at the highest level. Mad Dog jumps in and says, yeah, but what's Golden State going to want for Wiggins? Are the Lakers going to have to give up a first-round pick? Are they going to have to include multiple players? He says the problem with all these trades is that teams know the Lakers are desperate, so they're going to try to extract maximum value, and the Lakers have to be careful not to overpay. Stephen A. then brings up an interesting point that I hadn't really considered. He says maybe losing out on Hunter and Ellis is actually a blessing in disguise because it forces the Lakers to think bigger. He mentions that there's still time before the deadline and there are other players available who might be better fits. He specifically talks about the Brooklyn Nets and how they've got several guys who could help the Lakers with their depth and rotation issues. Mad Dog asks who specifically, and Stephen A. rattles off names like Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, saying these are guys who can defend, shoot the three, and don't need plays called for them. He says if the Lakers could put together a package to get a couple of those Nets players, that might actually solve more problems than just getting DeAndre Hunter alone would have. They spend a good amount of time discussing the Nets angle, and Stephen A. makes this point about how Rob Pelinka and Sean Marks, who's the Nets GM, have a good relationship and have done business before. He says that matters in the NBA, teams are more likely to trade with organizations they trust and have worked with in the past. Stephen A. says the Nets are clearly rebuilding. They're not trying to win games right now, so they should be willing to move their veteran pieces for future assets. Mad Dog agrees, but says the question is, what do the Lakers have that the Nets want? He says the Lakers don't have a ton of first-round picks to offer because they've already traded a bunch of them away over the years, and their young players aren't exactly blue-chip prospects that teams are dying to get their hands on. This is when the conversation takes a turn toward the future, and Stephen A. starts talking about the offseason and how maybe that's when the Lakers should really be making their big move. He says if they can't get a deal done now, that makes sense, then they should just stand pat and wait until the summer when more options become available. He mentions guys like Herb Jones from New Orleans, Peyton Watson from Denver, saying these are the types of two-way wings that the Lakers really need, and they might be more available in the offseason when teams have had time to evaluate their rosters and figure out what direction they're going. Mad Dog pushes back a little and says, but Stephen A., LeBron James is 39 years old. You can't keep telling Lakers fans to wait until next year. Every year that goes by is a year wasted of LeBron's career, and at some point, you have to make a move and try to win now. Stephen A. doesn't disagree with that assessment, but he doubles down on his point that making a bad trade now is worse than waiting for the right opportunity. He says, look at what happened with the Russell Westbrook trade. The Lakers gave up everything to get Westbrook, and it set them back years. He says they can't afford to make another mistake like that, so if the right deal isn't there, then you wait. He mentions that the Lakers still have Anthony Davis, who's playing at an MVP level. They still have LeBron, who's defying age and putting up incredible numbers. And if they can just get to the playoffs healthy, they have a chance to make noise. Mad Dog kind of reluctantly agrees, but says the Lakers need to do something to improve their depth because right now, when LeBron or AD sits, the offense completely falls apart. Then, out of nowhere, Molly brings up a name that I wasn't expecting at all. She says, "What about Ayo Dosunmu from the Chicago Bulls?" Both Stephen A. and Mad Dog kind of pause for a second, because it's clear they weren't expecting that name to come up either. But then Stephen A.'s eyes light up, and he says, "You know what? That's actually a really interesting idea." He starts breaking down why Dosunmu could make sense for the Lakers, talking about how he's a young, versatile guard who can play both on and off the ball. He can defend multiple positions, and most importantly, he's on a very affordable contract. Stephen A. says Dosunmu is exactly the type of player the Lakers should be targeting, someone who's not going to cost a fortune in terms of salary or assets to acquire, but who can come in and contribute right away. Mad Dog gets excited about this idea too, and he starts going through Dosunmu's stats and what he brings to the table. He says Dosunmu averaged something like 12 or 13 points per game last season. He's shooting a decent percentage from three, and he's one of the better perimeter defenders on a Chicago team that's been struggling defensively all year. Mad Dog makes the point that the Bulls are clearly going nowhere this season. They're a play-in team at best, so they should be willing to move pieces like Dosunmu for the right price. He says if the Lakers can get Dosunmu without giving up a first-round pick, that would be a steal. Stephen A. jumps back in and says, "The beauty of a guy like Ayo Dosunmu is that he fits perfectly with what the Lakers are trying to do. He doesn't need the ball in his hands all the time, which is important when you're playing with LeBron, who's going to be your primary ball handler. Dosunmu can play off the ball, cut to the basket, knock down open threes, and most importantly, he can guard the other team's best perimeter player, which is something the Lakers desperately need." Stephen A. says when you look at the Lakers' biggest weakness, it's perimeter defense. Teams just attack them on the outside and get whatever they want. If you add a guy like Dosunmu, who can really defend at that point of attack, it changes the entire complexion of your defense. Mad Dog brings up an interesting comparison, saying Dosunmu reminds him a little bit of Alex Caruso when Caruso was with the Lakers. He's not saying Dosunmu is as good as Caruso was, but he's saying there are similarities in terms of the role they play and what they bring to a team. Both guys are high-energy defenders who can also contribute offensively without needing plays called for them. Stephen A. loves that comparison and says exactly, and look at what Alex Caruso meant to those Lakers championship teams. He was a huge part of their success in the bubble. If Dosunmu can give you even 70% of what Caruso gave those teams, that's a massive upgrade for this Lakers roster. They start talking about what a potential trade for Dosunmu might look like, and this is where it gets into the nitty-gritty of NBA trade mechanics. Stephen A. says the Bulls are probably going to want at least one asset back, whether that's a young player or a future second-round pick or something along those lines. He says the Lakers might have to include a guy like Jalen Hood-Schifino, who hasn't really panned out for them. Or maybe they could include someone like Max Christie if the Bulls are interested in a young wing. Mad Dog says the problem is the salaries have to match, so the Lakers would need to figure out how to make the math work. He suggests they could include a veteran like Gabe Vincent, whose salary would help match Dosunmu's contract, and maybe throw in a future second-round pick to sweeten the deal. Stephen A. says if he's the Lakers, he's calling the Bulls right now and seeing what it would take to get Dosunmu. He says Chicago has made it pretty clear they're open for business. They've been fielding calls on pretty much everyone on their roster, except maybe Kobe White. So there's definitely a deal to be made there if the Lakers are willing to be aggressive. Mad Dog agrees and says the Lakers can't afford to be passive right now, not with the deadline coming up in just a few days. He says every hour that passes is an hour where another team could swoop in and grab a guy like Dosunmu. So if the Lakers are serious about improving their roster, they need to act fast. The conversation shifts to talking about how Dosunmu would fit into the Lakers' rotation. And both guys get pretty detailed about this. Stephen A. says you could play Dosunmu alongside Austin Reeves in the backcourt, and that would give you two guys who can both handle the ball and create for others while also being willing defenders. He says, imagine a lineup with Dosunmu, Reeves, LeBron, Rui Hachimura, and Anthony Davis. That's a lineup that can switch defensively, that can space the floor with shooting, and that has enough playmaking to keep the offense flowing. Mad Dog says the other option is to bring Dosunmu off the bench and use him as your sixth man, someone who can come in and give you energy and defense when your starters need a rest. He says either way, Dosunmu makes the Lakers better because he gives them another option, another guy who can contribute in meaningful minutes. Stephen A. then brings up a point about Dosunmu's age and contract situation, saying this is actually one of the most appealing things about him from the Lakers' perspective. He says Dosunmu is only 24 years old, so he's entering his prime, and his contract is relatively cheap for what he produces. Stephen A. says Dosunmu is making something like $5 or $6 million this season, which is nothing for a player of his caliber, and he's going to be a restricted free agent soon, which means the Lakers would have some control over him if they wanted to keep him long-term. Mad Dog says that's huge, because the Lakers are up against the cap, they don't have flexibility to take on big salaries, so getting a productive player on a reasonable contract is exactly what they need. They also talk about the fact that Dosunmu is from Chicago. He played college ball at Illinois, and he's been with the Bulls his entire NBA career, so there might be some reluctance on his part to leave. But Stephen A. says, at the end of the day, players want to win, and the Bulls aren't winning anything right now. If Dosunmu gets a chance to go to LA and play with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and compete for a championship, that's an opportunity he's probably going to be excited about. Mad Dog says yeah, and let's be honest, playing in Los Angeles for the Lakers is a completely different level of exposure and opportunity than playing in Chicago for a Bulls team that's going nowhere. He says if Dosunmu has any aspirations of building his brand and becoming a more well-known player around the league, going to the Lakers would be a great way to do that. Molly brings up an interesting question at this point, asking whether the Lakers pursuing Dosunmu means they've given up on landing a bigger name before the deadline. Stephen A. says not necessarily. He thinks the Lakers can do both. He says they could get Dosunmu and still make another move if the right opportunity presents itself. Mad Dog disagrees, though. He says, realistically, the Lakers don't have enough assets to make multiple significant trades. So if they're going after Dosunmu, that's probably going to be their move, and they're going to have to be satisfied with that. Stephen A. pushes back and says, but what if they can get Dosunmu from Chicago and also get a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith from Brooklyn? He says those two additions together would significantly improve the Lakers' depth and defense, and it wouldn't require them to give up any of their core pieces. The debate continues about whether that's realistic or not, and Mad Dog says, look, in a perfect world, yeah, the Lakers would love to add multiple rotation players before the deadline. But he says the reality is that every team in the league knows the Lakers are desperate to improve, so they're going to try to extract maximum value in any trade. He says the Lakers need to be careful not to mortgage their future just to add role players who might help them win a few more games this season. Stephen A. says, but that's the whole point of having LeBron James on your roster. You don't worry about the future. You worry about right now, because LeBron's not going to be playing at this level for much longer. They go back and forth on this for a while, and it's actually one of the more interesting debates I've heard them have because both guys make valid points. Mad Dog is taking the conservative approach, saying the Lakers need to be smart and not give up too much for players who aren't going to make them championship favorites. Stephen A. is taking the aggressive approach, saying when you have LeBron James, you do whatever it takes to give him help because opportunities like this don't come around often. Molly tries to mediate between them, asking whether there's a middle ground where the Lakers can improve without mortgaging their entire future. Stephen A. says the middle ground is a player like Ayo Dosunmu. He says Dosunmu doesn't cost a fortune to acquire. He doesn't have a massive contract, but he's good enough to make a real impact on a contending team. Stephen A. says if the Lakers can get Dosunmu and one other solid rotation player before the deadline, they're in a much better position than they are right now. He mentions that the Lakers have been getting killed on defense lately. Teams are scoring at will against them, and a lot of that is because they don't have enough guys who can really lock down on the perimeter. Dosunmu would help address that immediately. Mad Dog brings up the Keon Ellis situation again, circling back to the trade that started this whole conversation. He says it's interesting that Ellis ended up in Cleveland because the Cavs are already a second apron team and they're going to have to make some tough decisions about who they can afford to keep long-term. He says there's a very real possibility that the Cavs won't be able to re-sign Keon Ellis when he becomes a free agent, which means the Lakers might still have a shot at him in the offseason. Stephen A. says that's true, but the Lakers can't bank on that happening. He says you can't go into the offseason hoping to sign a guy who might not even be available. You have to make moves now when you know players are available and you have the opportunity to improve your team. The segment starts winding down, and they both kind of summarize their position. Stephen A. says the Lakers absolutely need to make a move before the deadline, whether that's for Ayo Dosunmu or someone else. They cannot stand pat and run it back with the same roster they have now. He says they're not good enough defensively, they don't have enough depth, and when LeBron or AD sits, the team falls apart. Mad Dog says he agrees the Lakers need to improve, but they have to be smart about it and not make a panic move just for the sake of doing something. He says if the right deal is there for a guy like Dosunmu who makes sense financially and basketball-wise, then yes, you absolutely do it. But if it's going to cost you too much, or if it's not the right fit, then you wait for a better opportunity. Molly wraps up the segment by saying, the Lakers have some big decisions to make over the next few days, and it's going to be fascinating to see what Rob Pelinka and the front office decide to do. She mentions that the deadline is Thursday, so we're going to know very soon whether the Lakers are buyers or sellers, or if they're just going to stand pat. Stephen A. gets in one final point, saying he thinks the Lakers are going to do something. He doesn't think they're going to let this deadline pass without making at least one move. He says there's too much pressure on the organization, too much scrutiny from the media and the fans, and they know they need to show that they're trying to build a championship contender around LeBron and AD. The whole segment was probably close to 25 minutes. And by the time it was over, I was completely convinced that Ayo Dosunmu to the Lakers makes a ton of sense. I hadn't really thought about him as a potential target before Molly brought up his name, but the more they talked about it, the more it clicked. He's young, he's affordable, he can defend, he can shoot, and he doesn't need to be a focal point of the offense. Those are all things the Lakers desperately need right now. Whether it actually happens or not is anyone's guess, but after watching that First Take segment, I really hope the Lakers are at least exploring this possibility, because it feels like one of those moves that could really help them without costing them everything they have in terms of assets and future picks. The deadline is coming up fast, and the Lakers are running out of time to make something happen, so we'll see if they pull the trigger on Dosunmu or if they end up going in a completely different direction.